Good day. The video is 9-1 Notes Part 2, and the big idea here is a review of solving quadratic equations. So review of solving quadratic equations. Okay, there are three methods to use to solve quadratic equations. All right. There are three examples. The first example is x squared plus 9 equals 25. Now, when only an x squared term is there, okay, isolate it, then take plus or minus square root both sides. So the first, what I need to do is isolate the x squared term here. So I'm going to subtract the 9 from both sides. And I write x squared equals 16. So isolate. And then I'm going to take the square root, the plus or minus square root of both sides. Plus or minus. Because when you square a negative, you get a positive. So you have to include that negative for 16. My answer is 4. I'm thinking ahead. So now the square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 16 is 4. So x equals plus or minus 4. All right, so here I'm going to take square root, and here I will simplify. All right, things get a little more complicated with the second example, but it's the same idea. When only an x squared, you're going to isolate it and take the square root of both sides, okay? So it looks like this. 3 times the square root of 5 squared plus 3 times the square root of 2 quantity squared equals x squared. Now x squared is already isolated here. We have to deal with this mess. So the square root of 3 times the square root of 5 squared is really 3 times the square root of 5 times 3 times the square root of 5. I wrote it twice. Plus 3 times the square root of 2 times 3 times the square root of 2. All right? Now, the one thing about this square root problem, this is equal to x squared. The one thing about this I always tell students is in times in, out times out. All right, you can't multiply the in numbers and the out numbers. You can't get 15 when you do this. But you can multiply the outside times the outside and the inside times the inside. So for this, 3 times the square root of 5, 3 times the square root of 5, I get 9 times the square root of 25. Plus, 3 times 3 is 9, 9 times the square root of 4 equals x squared. A bell should be going off because the square root of 25 we know is 5 and the square root of 4 we know is 2. So this term is really 9 times 5. And this term is really 9 times 2. So we're simplifying. Okay, and we get 45 plus 18. equals x squared. Now, 45 plus 18 is 63 is equal to x squared. So x equals plus or minus the square root of 63. This is exactly like this right here, see? So we take the square root of both sides, and when we take the square root of 63, plus or minus here, and plus or minus here, or no, plus or minus the square root of 63 and x squared, okay, we get x equals plus or minus the square root of 63. But what we should notice is this square root of 63 has to be simplified. So here, x equals plus or minus, I'm going to write 63 as 9 times 7. And then this 9 comes out as a 3. So I'm done by writing x equals plus or minus 3 times the square root of 7. That's two values. One is 3 times the square root of 7, and the other one is negative 3 times the square root of 7. Okay, so that's what that plus or minus means. Okay, so that one's a little more complicated because we have to remember to do this, right? In times in, or out times out, and then in times in gives me that, 9 times the square root of 4. Okay? So, and then we applied it over here too. All right, now that's a quadratic equation because we got x squared by itself. Now, the first problem, we had to get x squared by itself doing some work. Sometimes you have to isolate it, right? Okay, so problem, the last example is a quadratic. So it's going to be x squared, I'm going to do 2, I think. I have time for 2. X squared minus 10x equals negative 16. Now, with an x term, look to factor. So you want to look to factor with 0 on the right. So this 16 has to be brought over. X squared minus 10x plus 16 equals 0. You've done this a lot. Factoring is a big deal. X and x here, and two numbers that multiply to get positive 16 and add to get negative 10 are negative 8 and negative 2. Because negative 2 times negative 8 is positive 16, and negative 8 plus negative 2 is negative 10. And then we set this equal to 0, and we get x equals 8, and we set this factor equal to 0, and we get x equals 2. All right, last example is just a little bit different, and that's it. I think this would be example 4 if you're counting. So this one says x squared plus 5x equals 0. Now there are two methods to do this, and I like, since it's equal to 0 already, I'm going to factor right away. And this is how we factor. We factor out an x. X squared plus 5x is written as x times, I divide an x out of x squared and I get x, and then I divide a x out of 5 and I get, or 5x and I get 5. And this is equal to 0. Now, just like this, x minus 2 times x minus 8 equals 0, we have x and x plus 5 times x plus 5 equals 0. So we're going to set this factor equal to 0, or x plus 5 equals 0. X is solved for right here, and x plus 5 gives us x equals negative 5. Okay, so there are 4 examples on factoring, and one of the examples started out when there's only an x squared term. You're going to isolate that x. There's no x term here. And then you're going to take the plus or minus square root of both sides. Now, we had to apply the first part of the chapter there, the first part of simplifying radicals, to that one. That one's got a little complicated, but go back in the video and see it. And then the last 2, we factored and said equal to 0. Factor and said equal to 0. All right, there's some review problems for 9.1, which is reviewing radicals and quadratic equations. Have a good day.